The dining room was a cocoon of soft shadows, the chandelier casting a warm, amber glow over the mahogany table. The aroma of rosemary-crusted lamb lingered untouched, as steam curled faintly from the platter. A crystal glass of Cabernet sat before Elise Harper, its deep red surface undisturbed, reflecting the flicker of candlelight. She stared at it, her hazel eyes unblinking, as if it held answers to the unraveling of her world. Across from her, her husband of 22 years, Nathan Caldwell, sat in his tailored charcoal suit, his tie loosened just enough to suggest he'd rehearsed this moment. His voice, steady and devoid of warmth, cut through the quiet hum of the evening. "I think we should get a divorce." Elise's fork slipped from her fingers, landing soundlessly on the linen napkin. The words didn't spark anger or tears, not yet. Instead, a strange numbness washed over her, like stepping into a cold lake. For 22 years, she built a life with Nathan through late-night conversations, shared dreams, and the quiet rhythm of routine. She'd never imagined this, not from the man who once kissed her forehead during thunderstorms to calm her fears. His face remained impassive, as if he were delivering a quarterly report. "There's someone else," he continued, his tone clinical, rehearsed. "Her name's Sophia. She's younger, more aligned with where I am now." Elise blinked, her gaze drifting back to the wine. The lamb's steam had faded, the plate as cold as her hands. Younger. Aligned. The words hung like smoke, curling into her thoughts. Nathan wasn't just leaving, was erasing her, replacing her with someone who fit a new script. She wasn't enough anymore, not vibrant, not exciting, just a relic of a life he'd outgrown. "Is this what you want?" she asked, her voice a fragile thread, barely audible over the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Nathan's eyes flicked to his phone, then back to her. "You're a good woman, Elise," he said, his tone patronizing, "but you've become stagnant. Predictable. I want to live, not just coast." Each word was a blade, slicing through the identity she'd woven into their marriage. Stagnant. Predictable. She'd feared those labels in her quiet moments, but to hear them from Nathan, the man who once called her his anchor, was a betrayal deeper than infidelity. She stood, her movements mechanical, and carried the untouched wineglass to the sink. She didn't beg or shout. "If this is your choice," she said, her back to him, "then go." He didn't hesitate. Nathan rose, grabbed a leather duffel bag from the hallway already packed, she realized with a pang, and walked out. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening, louder than any argument they'd ever had. Elise stood by the sink, the cold porcelain grounding her as the reality settled. Her role in Nathan's story was over. In the weeks that followed, Elise moved through their Victorian home like a specter. The creak of the oak floors, once comforting, now echoed with absence. Nathan's coffee mug, a chipped ceramic relic from their first vacation, sat untouched in the cupboard. His leather-bound journals lined the study shelves, their spines gathering dust. She couldn't bring herself to move them. It would mean admitting he was truly gone. Bills arrived in both their names, oblivious to the fracture. Neighbors waved from their porches, unaware. Friends texted, but Elise let the messages pile up, unanswered. What could she say? That Nathan had traded her for a 26-year-old named Sophia, a yoga instructor with a radiant Instagram presence? Sophia's name surfaced soon after, whispered by a mutual friend at the grocery store. Elise hadn't sought her out, but curiosity sharp and unbiddened her to Sophia's social media. The photos were a punch to the gut. Nathan and Sophia on a cliffside in Santorini, their wineglasses clinking against a sunset. The caption read, "Embracing life unapologetically." Nathan, once a man of spreadsheets and early bedtimes, now wore linen shirts and a carefree grin. He looked like a stranger, reborn in Sophia's orbit. Her posts were a curated masterpiece: flawless skin, tousled hair, captions dripping with empowerment. But Elise saw the subtext in Sophia's words, the subtle jabs at women who settle for ordinary. It was clear who those barbs targeted. Elise's world shrank. She avoided book club, declined coffee dates, and muted her phone. The house, once a haven, felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. She'd wake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, replaying Nathan's words. Stagnant. Predictable. Had she really become that? She'd given up her career in marketing a decade ago to manage Nathan's law firm from the shadow, scheduling client meetings, proofreading contracts, hosting dinners for partners. It was her labor that kept his practice thriving, but it was invisible, unpaid, unacknowledged. Now, at 46, she was starting from nothing. The first time she saw them in person was at a charity gala she'd nearly skipped. Her friend Clara, insistent, had dragged her along, promising a low-key evening. Elise wore a navy-sheath dress, her chestnut hair swept into a neat chignon, hoping to blend into the crowd. But then she heard a ripple of laughter near the entrance. Nathan and Sophia swept in, arms linked, their presence commanding the room. Sophia's emerald dress hugged her frame, her laughter bright and performative. Heads turned, conversations paused. Elise's breath caught, her fingers tightening around her champagne flute. They didn't notice her at first, tucked near the bar. But when Nathan's eyes met hers, he froze, then offered a faint, condescending smile, like greeting a distant acquaintance. Sophia's gaze raked over Elise, her lips curling into a smirk. She leaned into Nathan, whispering something that made him chuckle. Then, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, Nathan said, "Some people just cling to the past, don't they?" The laughter that followed was a blade, slicing through Elise's composure. She stood rooted, her face burning, the flute trembling in her hand. She left early, her dignity fraying, and cried in her car, no for Nathan, but for the humiliation of being reduced to a punchline. That night marked a turning point. The echo of their laughter haunted her, but it also ignited something dormant. Elise was done being the discarded wife, the woman defined by Nathan's betrayal. She stood before her bedroom mirror, studying the woman she'd become. Fine lines framed her eyes, her shoulders sagged under years of sacrifice, but beneath it all was a spark, raw, unshaken. "This isn't the end," she whispered to her reflection. "It can't be." She began with a list, scribbled in a leather-bound notebook she'd once used for grocery lists. Dreams she'd abandoned. Traveling to Morocco, learning to paint, opening a small business. Hobbies she'd let slip. Photography, gardening, writing poetry. At the bottom, in sharp, deliberate letters, she wrote, "Myself." For years, she'd poured her energy into Nathan's ambitions, leaving her own to wither. No more. Elise hadn't updated her resume in 15 years. Her last official job was as a marketing coordinator, a role she'd left to support Nathan's firm. Sitting in a quiet coffee shop, the hum of espresso machines in the background, she stared at a blank template on her laptop. Her hands hovered over the keys, doubt creeping in. Where did she even start? She sipped her latte, now lukewarm, and decided to claim her invisible work. Operations manager, she typed, listing the tasks she'd handled for Nathan. Budgeting, client relations, event planning. It wasn't a lie, it was the truth she'd never been credited for. She applied to dozens of jobs, administrative roles, part-time gigs, anything to rebuild her confidence. Rejections piled up, each one a small sting, but one email caught her eye. A community bookstore, the open page, needed a part-time manager to handle inventory and events. The pay was modest, but the idea of working surrounded by books, a passion she'd neglected, felt like a lifeline. Elise printed her resume, slipped into a tailored blazer, and walked into the interview with her heart pounding. The bookstore was a cozy haven, its shelves lined with novels and poetry, fairy lights strung across the ceiling. The owner, Maya, was a woman in her 30s with a warm smile and a streak of purple in her hair. "You're Elise?" she asked, shaking her hand. The interview unfolded like a conversation, Maya asking about Elise's organizational skills and ability to connect with people. Elise spoke of managing high-stakes client dinners and defusing crises, surprised by how naturally the words flowed. She'd forgotten how much she'd done, how capable she was. The next day, Maya called with an offer. Elise accepted, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It wasn't the money, it was the validation. Someone had seen her worth. Her first day was a whirlwind of nervous energy, learning the inventory system and greeting customers. By the end of her shift, Maya clapped her on the shoulder. "You're a natural, Elise. You make people feel welcome." The words were a balm, soothing wounds she hadn't realized still ached. The bookstore became her sanctuary, but it wasn't without challenges. Some younger staff members, barely out of college, treated her like an outsider, whispering when she entered the break room, joking about her mom energy. Elise smiled through it, refusing to let their disdain dim her resolve. She'd faced worse than petty cliques. Still, the subtle dismissal gnawed at her, whispering doubts. Was she too old for this? Did she belong? Maya noticed. One afternoon as they restocked shelves, she said, "Don't let them get to you. They don't know what you've been through." Elise nodded, grateful, but she knew this job was a stepping stone, not a destination. At night, she wrote in her notebook, listing her strengths: problem-solving, empathy, resilience. The discomfort, she realized, was a sign she was meant for more. Among the bookstore staff was Lila, a 24-year-old with a nose ring and a penchant for quoting Kerouac. Unlike the others, Lila didn't dismiss Elise. She'd linger after shifts, chatting about literature or her dreams of opening a nonprofit. One evening as they closed up, Lila leaned against the counter. "You're different, Elise. You've got this quiet strength, like you've seen the world and come out stronger." Elise laughed, caught off guard. "Strength? That's a new one." "I mean it," Lila said. "You don't pretend to be something you're not. That's rare." Their conversations deepened, evolving into a friendship that bridged their age gap. Lila shared stories of her father, Victor, a philanthropist who ran Haven Foundation, a nonprofit focused on community development. "Dad's always looking for people with integrity to join his team," Lila said one day, almost casually. "Someone like you." Elise blinked. "Me? I'm just a bookstore clerk." Lila grinned. "You're more than that, and you know it." A week later, Lila handed her a business card. "Dad wants to meet you. He's launching a new initiative and needs someone to oversee operations. I told him you're the real deal." Elise stared at the card, her pulse quickening. Haven Foundation was a respected name, known for its work in education and housing. The idea of managing a project for them felt surreal, too big for the woman who'd been pouring coffee and shelving books. Her instinct was to decline, but Lila's words echoed, "You're more than that." She agreed to the meeting, tempering her expectations. People had underestimated her before. Maybe this time, she'd surprise them. The Haven Foundation's office was a sleek, glass-walled space in downtown Portland. Elise arrived in her trusty blazer, her palms damp with nerves. Victor, a man in his late 50s with a kind but piercing gaze, greeted her warmly. "Lila speaks highly of you," he said, gesturing to a chair. The interview was less a grilling than a dialogue. Victor asked about her past, her approach to challenges, her vision for leadership. When Elise described her years of managing Nathan's firm without titles or pay, leaned forward, intrigued. "That's the kind of experience you can't teach," he said. By the end of the hour, Victor offered her a role as operations lead for a new community outreach program. The salary was triple her bookstore pay, but it was his belief in her that left her speechless. "We need someone who understands people, not just systems," he said. "That's you." Elise accepted, her voice steady, though her heart raced with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The transition was daunting. Elise felt like an imposter among her younger, tech-savvy colleagues, who tossed around jargon she barely understood. She spent nights studying project management software, reading reports and asking questions, even when it exposed her inexperience. Doubt lingered. Had she overreached? But she remembered that gala, Nathan's smirk, Sophia's whisper. That humiliation became her fuel. Within months, Elise's impact was undeniable. She streamlined communication between departments, resolved vendor disputes with calm precision, and fostered a team culture of respect. Staff turnover plummeted, and the program's pilot launch, a series of community workshops, earned praise from local leaders. Victor pulled her aside after a board meeting. "You've turned this project around, Elise. You're a leader." For the first time, she believed it. Social media offered glimpses of Nathan and Sophia's life, though Elise checked less frequently. Their posts grew flashy react parties, branded retreats, but there was a brittleness to their smiles, a performative edge. Elise no longer envied them. She was building something real, something hers. Then came the scandal. A coworker mentioned it casually over lunch. Sophia, the wellness guru, was embroiled in a fraud controversy. Elise opened her laptop, and the headlines confirmed it. Sophia had been caught inflating her brand's revenue, dodging taxes and faking endorsements. Sponsors fled and her followers turned vicious. A week later, another blow. Nathan's new venture, a wellness consultancy tied to Sophia's brand, filed for bankruptcy. Rumors swirled of reckless spending and mismanagement. Elise read the articles, her expression neutral. She didn't gloat or feel vindicated. Instead, a quiet clarity settled over her. Nathan's rejection had once made her question her worth, but now she saw the truth. She hadn't been the problem. She'd been the foundation he'd taken for granted. Free from his shadow, she was thriving. One morning, an email arrived from the Pacific Women's Leadership Conference. They'd heard of her work with Haven and wanted her to speak on resilience and reinvention. Elise stared at the invitation, her stomach twisting. Speak to a room of executives and founders? She nearly declined, but Lila's voice echoed. You're the real deal. She said yes, not for applause, but because her story, raw and unpolished, might help someone else. Preparing the speech was grueling. Elise wrote and rewrote, practicing in her car, her living room, even the bookstore's back room. Lila coached her on delivery. Victor offered feedback. Speak from your strength, not your pain. Elise chose vulnerability over polish, honesty over bravado. She bought a tailored emerald dress, its hue a quiet nod to her rebirth. In the fitting room, she saw not just a woman who'd aged, but one who'd endured and emerged stronger. The conference was held in a gleaming Seattle ballroom, its chandeliers casting a golden glow. Backstage, Elise's heart pounded. But when her name was called, she stepped forward, her stride steady. The applause was warm, but a familiar face in the back row stopped her cold. Nathan, his hair grayer, his posture weary. Beside him sat Sophia, her face taut, her eyes avoiding Elise's. For a moment Elise faltered, but then she straightened, her voice clear as she began. She spoke of loss, not just of a marriage but of identity. She described the slow, painful work of rebuilding, of finding purpose in the wreckage. Sometimes what feels like the end is just the beginning of who you were meant to be, she said. The audience leaned in, their silence profound. In the back, Nathan's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, but Elise didn't waver. This stage was hers. The applause was thunderous. Backstage, women approached her, some in tears, thanking her for giving voice to their pain. But the moment that lingered came later, in the networking lounge. Nathan stood a few feet away, Sophia at his side, her expression unreadable. Elise, he said, his voice hesitant. She met his gaze, calm and unflinching. Hello, Nathan. He fumbled for words, finally muttering. I didn't expect this. Elise nodded, her smile faint but steady. I did. She walked past, her heels clicking softly, leaving him in her wake. Behind her she heard him whisper, she's not the woman I knew. But Elise didn't turn back. She had no need to. Word of her speech spread, earning her invitations to speak at other events, consult for nonprofits, even join a corporate board. But the most unexpected came weeks later. An offer from a national talk show to share her story. Elise hesitated. Television felt too exposed, but agreed. Driven by the women who'd written to her, saying her words had given them hope. On air, the host asked, what do you tell someone who feels discarded? Elise's answer was simple, delivered with quiet conviction. Your worth isn't tied to someone else's inability to see it. Their leaving doesn't diminish you, it reveals them. The studio fell silent, the weight of her words resonating across screens nationwide. Elise's life became a tapestry of purpose. She mentored women quietly, meeting them in coffee shops, listening to their stories of betrayal and doubt. Rebuilding starts with remembering who you were before the world told you you weren't enough, she'd say. Their nods, their tears, their tentative smiles were her true reward. Years later, on the 7th anniversary of her divorce, Elise sat in her garden, now lush with roses and lavender. She poured a glass of wine, not in sorrow but in celebration. In her journal she wrote, Thank you, Nathan, for leaving. I found myself because you didn't stay. She closed the book, the sky above her vast and clear. The past was a chapter, not her story. Elise Harper had become whole not in spite of her fall, but because of it. And as she stepped into her future, she carried a quiet, unshakable joy, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be.
If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.